name is Toby Johnson, and 2 months ago, I made what my mother would have called a very unwise bargain. She'd have delivered that verdict with her watery smile and that gentle pat on my shoulder. Dad wouldn't have wasted breath on gentle warnings. He'd have lit one of those dollar store cigars, cracked open whatever beer was $4.99 for a 12-pack that week, and said, "You're in for it now, kid." He never was one for coddling. Inheriting my father's failing elevator repair business was like adopting a 3-legged, half-blind dog with a taste for ankles. The dream of opening my own coffee shop with sunlight streaming through big windows got buried under mounting debt notices and final warning letters from the bank. Johnson Elevation Services wasn't just failing, it was bleeding money. So when the call came from Spring Hill Hospital offering me a contract that paid triple the going rate to maintain their antiquated vertical transport system, I practically begged them to email the paperwork before they changed their minds. The front lobby hit me like a physical force. Cavernous ceilings and worn marble floors from another era, the kind you see in horror movies right before something terrible happens. The receptionist's face should have been my first warning, a pasted-on smile that came nowhere close to touching her 2 wide eyes. She passed me a folder marked "Welcome, Technician," like she was handling radioactive waste, and directed me through what she called the labyrinth. Every hallway in Spring Hill Hospital looks exactly the same. Lights that flicker just enough to make you doubt your eyes, and random steel doors that hiss when you walk past. Eventually, a tall orderly with shoulders like a coat hanger flagged me down. He handed me a key to a basement room without making eye contact. "We need you," he mumbled, "day or night, especially night." Then he pressed a second sealed envelope into my hands, his knuckles white with tension. They said, "You'd need this. Don't read it alone." The basement corridor led to a heavy metal door with staff quarters, technicians, painted in chipped letters. I pushed it open and was welcomed by a glorified closet, a bed that shrieked at the slightest movement, a steel locker with dents that looked suspiciously like fist marks, and walls that smelled like someone's 3-day-old Chinese takeout had died there. Before I could even sit down, the ceiling speaker crackled to life. A voice, flat, sexless, slightly distorted, announced, "Attention, Toby Johnson has arrived. Welcome, Toby." Then, dropping to a whisper, "We hope you enjoy your stay." I guess that was the true beginning. Toby Johnson, 24/7 elevator maintenance boy, first-time occupant of a basement prison cell, in a hospital that stank of wrongness. My father's voice echoed in my memory, something about never taking jobs in death traps. "Too late, Dad. I'm already here." 6 hours since arriving, I can feel the weight of this place settling into my bones as I finally open the envelope. Terror often lurks in mundane objects. This elevator protocols sheet embodied that horror, a harmless-looking page with what I desperately wished was rust staining its corner. The dark red blotch looked too much like blood. I twisted the key in my creaky door, my fingers recoiling from the sticky residue coating the knob. The naked bulb above sputtered, casting manic shadows across the paper. "Breathe, Toby. Just read the damn thing." The page warned. 1. From 3:05 a.m. to 3:15 a.m., do not operate the elevator, especially if someone requests the morgue floor. Break it, and you'll discover the morgue isn't the only place the dead gather. 2. If a disoriented patient wearing an oxygen mask tries to descend alone, do not let them press basement. Once they do, you won't be able to breathe. 3. If you spot fresh blood on the elevator floor, page Environmental Protocol 13, never clean it by hand. 1 drop in your veins and something else rides with you. 4. When the red emergency phone in the elevator rings, do not answer it. If you do, the voice on the line will know exactly where to find you. 5. Never allow a patient with blank eyes near reflective surfaces inside the elevator. They'll see themselves for what they truly are, and it won't stay inside. At precisely 2:22 a.m., ensure all elevator doors are closed, even if you hear someone calling for help. Open them, and you'll be the one crying for help. 7. The isolation ward button is locked for a reason. If it lights up on its own, do not press it. Whatever's isolated down there doesn't want to stay alone. The final line in smaller print read, Failure to comply will result in immediate termination. Ice flooded my veins. In normal jobs, termination means fired. But as I fixated on that crimson stain seeping into the paper's fibers, my mind translated it differently. You're dead. A laugh burst from my throat that sounded more like a strangled cry. So that's why the money's so good. The bloodstain darkened before my eyes, moisture spreading through the fibers until a warm droplet oozed onto my fingertip. Jesus! I lurched back, frantically scrubbing my hand against my pants. The paper lay innocent on the desk, the stain dry and ancient again. But I still felt it, warm and sticky against my skin. The bulb above me popped and dimmed before blazing brighter. The hospital intercom crackled to life, spitting static before a voice, raspy and wet, slithered through. Follow them, or follow him. Then silence. Perfect. A cryptic riddle to accompany my nightmare rulebook. I had no damn clue who him was, and my survival instinct screamed not to find out by breaking these insane instructions. But I couldn't quit. My bank account had dwindled to single digits, and Dad's creditors were circling like vultures. So I grabbed a stubby pencil and copied each rule onto my notepad, muttering them aloud to burn them into my brain. The pencil grew heavier with each word, like I was dragging it through molasses. For a heartbeat, I swore I was writing in red, not gray. The first full day at Spring Hill Hospital felt like an eternity. Sleep came in fitful bursts, leaving me with a migraine that pulses behind my left eye as I check my phone. Spring Hill Hospital's elevator system twisted like the thoughts of a madman. The blueprint showed multiple sublevels, S1, S2, S3, and God knows what else lurking deeper. My first repair job landed like a brick, a busted door sensor on sublevel 1. Malfunctioning door sensor, please respond ASAP. I grabbed Dad's ancient toolbox and shuffled toward the nearest elevator. The corridors stretched empty as a funeral home at midnight. The few staff scurrying by refused to meet my eyes. When the doors parted on sublevel 1, the air punched my lungs, thick and rotten, like breathing through wet cardboard. The hallway looked like someone's apocalypse dream. Rusted gurneys lined up like silent sentinels, paint peeling in jaundiced flakes, and lights so dim they seemed to swallow brightness rather than create it. A sign proclaimed, Overflow Ward. According to whispers, S1 housed people better kept away from prying eyes upstairs. Violent ones, broken ones, or something worse that no one dared name out loud. My toolbox hit the floor with a clang that bounced off the walls like a pinball. Just fix it and get the hell back where the living walk, I muttered. The elevator behind me chimed. The doors yawned open, but I hadn't called it. I'd locked the damn thing in place. The empty car stood waiting, doors splayed wide, a metal throat inviting me in. Not today, I whispered, turning back to the sensor panel. The lights flickered, on off on, and my eyes drifted to half-open doors on my left. Through grimy glass, I glimpsed someone perched on a bed's edge, face hidden behind gauzy fabric. They sat frozen, unnaturally still. A nurse materialized from a side corridor, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't make eye contact," she hissed, nodding toward the veiled figure. Then she vanished. The rule about blank eyes flashed in my brain, though it mentioned mirrors, not veils. Metal screeched, bed springs protesting. The veiled figure rotated toward me with mechanical precision. Even across the hallway, I sensed a yawning emptiness behind that veil, a void that pulled at something inside me. I forced my gaze to the floor. "I can see you," came a voice like wet silk sliding over gravel. "I can see what you'll become." My fingers froze mid-wire. The voice wasn't human, not quite male or female, but something that had forgotten what either meant. It rippled with undertones that made my skin try to crawl off my bones. "Stop looking at me." The words slithered across the silence. The elevator chimed again, still waiting behind me. I attacked the sensor. Simple fix, loose wiring, contacts eaten away by years of neglect. My fingers worked while my mind remained hyper-aware of the presence at my back. "You're next, you know. Closer now. They brought you here for us. Fresh meat, fresh eyes. You'll look better without them." Cloth whispered against linoleum, the veiled figure approaching. Terror locked my joints. Do you want to see what's under here? The voice lilted with sick playfulness. They took my face but gave me something better, something that can see through you. I reconnected the last wire and slammed the panel. I snatched my kit and spun toward the elevator, my only escape. My heart stalled. The veiled patient stood barely 10 feet away, blocking my path. Their gaze burned through me like acid. The veil clung to places, darkened with something that couldn't possibly be tears. Won't you look at me, Toby? My name sounded wrong in its mouth. Look at what they did to me. What they'll do to you when they've finished. A gray-tinged hand rose to the veil's edge. The fabric lifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of something glistening and uneven. Not flesh as I knew it. With a shuffling motion, they moved aside. My legs carried me into the elevator. My finger stabbed the basement button. The doors hissed shut. But as metal met metal, one final whisper snaked through. I'll be seeing you in the reflections, Toby. We all will. My reflection stared back from the polished walls. A ghost wearing my face, skin blanched, eyes wild with animal panic. Then I saw it. My reflection wasn't mirroring me. While I cowered against the wall, it stood upright, head cocked at an angle no living neck could manage. It raised one finger to its lips in a conspiratorial gesture. Stay quiet, my reflection mouthed, though my own lips remained frozen in silent terror. When the doors parted on the basement, I stumbled out. I wasn't built for this nightmare. Yet beneath the horror festered a twisted pride. I'd faced something beyond explanation and walked away. But as I fled back to my room, those hollow eyes burned in my mind. And worse, my own reflection, moving by itself, as if something else now lived inside every mirrored surface of Spring Hill Hospital. 6 hours since the incident with the veiled woman, and my hands still tremble as I recalibrate the main service elevator's weight sensors. The clock's steady crawl toward evening feels like a death sentence. There's a peculiar quality to time here, simultaneously stretching into infinity while collapsing into moments that blur together. It's Tuesday, but it feels like I've aged years since Monday. By noon, my mind was fracturing at the edges, desperate for anything to explain what I'd witnessed. Between maintenance calls, I haunted the main floors, hungry for scraps of staff conversation that might make sense of this nightmare while checking electrical connections and door alignments. The hospital staff treated me like I carried something contagious. Doctors looked through me as I tested emergency phone lines. Nurses veered away as if I radiated poison when I arrived to unstick a fifth-floor car. Orderlies choked conversations dead the moment I appeared with my toolbox. Everyone had learned the unspoken rule. Avoid the elevator guy. Avoid me. I spotted my chance when I saw Dr. Brown standing alone by a vending machine near a junction box I needed to access. Her black hair pulled back so severely it stretched her skin taut against her skull. "Excuse me, Dr. Brown. Need to check this panel," I said, gesturing to the wall beside her. She turned, lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes, like someone wearing a mask with a smile painted on. "You must be Toby," she whispered, the words sliding between us like a secret. "Our new elevator technician." "Yeah," I forced a laugh that rattled hollow in my chest. Word travels fast. She nodded once. The hospital always knows its new arrivals. Something in her phrasing sent ice water trickling down my spine, but I shoved the feeling down as I knelt to open the panel. She watched me work, then led me into a break room barely bigger than a coffin when I asked about the building's power fluctuations. "Spring Hill Hospital can be overwhelming," she murmured, pouring tea that smelled like something you'd use to embalm small animals. "But rest assured, there's nothing to fear if you keep your head down." I tested a wall outlet, pretending nonchalance while my heart hammered against my ribs. "I was on sub-level 1 yesterday. Saw things that made me wonder if that ward is normal." Her face emptied of expression. "We have many wards, Toby. Some are less public." Her eyes pinned me like a butterfly to a collection board. "But you must never go looking for answers that don't concern you." Movement flickered in the mirrored cabinet behind her. I froze. Her reflection's lips were moving independent of her actual face, mouthing what looked like "help me" or "don't trust them." My stomach twisted itself into knots. Words tumbled from my mouth unbidden as I tucked voltage meters back into my belt. "I've heard rumors. Strange rules. Why are those sublevels so restricted? Her reflection contorted in silent agony while her actual face remained placid as a frozen lake. Whatever you heard, Mr. Johnson, dismiss such rumors. Curiosity is a luxury you cannot afford here. Have you seen her? The question leaked out barely louder than breath. The veiled woman on sublevel 1. Dr. Brown went rigid, a statue of flesh. In the mirror behind her, her reflection's face twisted into a silent scream. There is no veiled woman, she stated, voice flatter than a flat line. Just as there are no bleeding walls, no whispering elevators, and no independent reflections. Do you understand, Mr. Johnson? My blood crystallized. I hadn't mentioned anything about bleeding walls or whispering elevators. A nurse appeared. Dr. Brown, Ward C needs you, urgent. The patient with the missing eyes keeps asking for maintenance staff. My head jerked up at this, remembering Rule 5 about patients with blank eyes. I'd need to be vigilant if I encountered such a patient. As Dr. Brown leaned toward the door, she paused, her breath hot against my ear. The walls have ears here, Toby. And sometimes they have mouths too. Follow the rules. They exist for a reason. By the time I dragged myself back to my room after completing my maintenance log, I felt only deeper certainty that these rules were the thin thread suspending me above an abyss. I closed the door and slumped against it. Then I saw them. Dark streaks across my wall that hadn't existed hours ago. Letters forming new words. She knows what lives in the walls. The message glistened with wet vitality. As I watched, the letters began to weep. Crimson tears trailing down concrete like something mourning its own existence. When they reached the floor, they pooled together, forming a puddle that pulsed with rhythmic life, like a disembodied heart beating on my floor. Sleep had just begun to drag me under when my phone's scream jolted me awake. A text glowed in the darkness. Mechanical glitch in elevator near Wing D, possible hazard. The clock mocked me. 2:50 a.m. The elevator carried me upward with a reluctant groan. I pried at the control panel, nostrils filling with the acrid stink of melted wires. The doors slid open on their own, revealing a man swaying in the threshold. His hospital gown hung from skeletal shoulders, oxygen mask strapped to his face like a parasite. Rule 2 flashed through my mind. If a disoriented patient wearing an oxygen mask tries to descend alone, do not let them press basement. The man's eyes wandered beneath drooping lids, unfocused yet somehow hungry. His finger jabbed repeatedly at the door close button. Sir, you okay? I positioned myself between him and the floor buttons. No response, just a trembling finger raised toward the basement button. His oxygen mask hissed with each labored breath. Once they press that button, you won't be able to breathe. Please, he rasped through the plastic. I need to go down. They're waiting. They need fresh air, fresh lungs. I snatched his wrist before he could reach the panel. He howled, a sound too primal for human vocal cords. The lights above us stuttered into a strobe effect. The man's strength surged beyond what his frail body should possess. Let go. His voice plummeted 3 octaves deeper. They promised me relief if I brought them another. It doesn't have to be me anymore. Need, air, below. Each word rattled like coins in a dead man's pocket. Like hell you do, I growled, wrestling him away from the buttons. His mask slipped sideways, revealing lips blistered black and teeth gone the color of week-old corpses. His face began to shift, as if his features were puzzle pieces being rearranged by invisible fingers. One eye drifted toward his temple while the other bulged outward. You don't understand, he gurgled. They're inside me, in my lungs, breathing when I breathe. I just want to give them to someone else. I slammed my palm against the emergency stop. The car jerked to a halt. The man's shriek wasn't human. His body convulsed, and before my eyes, he collapsed. No, not collapsed, deflated. His gown shriveled, the mask cracked like an eggshell, and his entire being dissolved into bandages and putrid air. The rule flashed again. Once they do, you won't be able to breathe. Not a metaphor. A fucking warning label. Movement caught my eye, the bandages twitching, rustling against the floor. The empty mask wheezed, sucking air without lungs. The mask lifted, hovering above the withered mess. A voice slithered out from nothing. "We'll find another way in, Toby." Everyone breathes eventually. When the doors parted, I kicked the bandages aside with my boot. My phone chimed. "Glitch resolved. Good job." I nearly hurled it against the wall. Back in my room, I peeled off clothes drenched in cold sweat. Every time I blinked, I saw the man dissolving, human to nothing in seconds. The rules had saved me, but each survival came at a cost. Pieces of my sanity flaked away like those bandages. My eyes drifted to the ceiling corner. A dark spot pulsed there, expanding and contracting with the steady rhythm of lungs drawing breath. I rolled over, screwing my eyes shut. Just water damage, just old pipes and shitty lighting. But the wet, sucking sound from that empty mask followed me into nightmares where I couldn't breathe, where something else breathed for me. Morning creeps in like an unwelcome guest, the thin basement window admitting just enough light to confirm I survived another night. I clawed my way back to consciousness around noon, my skull pounding. Another routine assignment buzzed on my phone. I needed supplies, so I headed to a storage closet I'd spotted earlier. The closet wasn't a closet at all, but a cavernous room where shelves sagged under decades of forgotten equipment. I dug through tangled cables that reminded me of intestines and toolkits that had rusted into tetanus traps. Then my light caught it. A pile of gray coveralls abandoned in the corner. One bore a name tag, G. Harris, elevator technician. A predecessor. Someone who'd walked these corridors before me. The fabric felt wrong under my fingertips, stiff and unnatural. It reeked of metal oxide and something darker, oxidized blood. My eyes followed a thick elevator cable that vanished behind the shelves, disappearing into the wall itself. Walk away, now before you see what you can't unsee. My brain screamed the warning, but my body betrayed me, feet shuffling forward. I edged around the shelves and the world tilted sideways. The cable had impaled a man against the concrete, pinned him like a butterfly in a collection. Not a fresh corpse, but something mummified by time, wearing a uniform patch. G. Harris, elevator technician. His skeletal hand clutched a scrap of paper. The handwriting lurched across the page. The phone rang. I answered. Now it knows me. My legs turned to water. Rule 4 blazed through my brain. When the red emergency phone in the elevator rings, do not answer it. Graham Harris had answered. This obscene display was the consequence. What froze my blood wasn't just the body, but the deliberate arrangement. The cable pulled through solid concrete with enough force to skewer a man, then left on display like a museum exhibit titled The Fate of Rule Breakers. As I stood there, the corpse's head rotated toward me, click, grind, snap, neck vertebrae grinding against each other like stones in a dried riverbed. The jaw hung askew, but I heard it, a voice like sand pouring through an hourglass. They said, I needed to wait for you. I stumbled backward, crashing into a tower of rusted toolboxes. The corpse's hollow gaze tracked me like a predator. As I scrambled toward the exit, that papery voice whispered again, Toby, don't answer when it calls, but if you hear scratching in the walls, run. Back in my room, I slammed the door and collapsed. So this was my predecessor's fate. Maybe there had been others before him. A chain of technicians, each replacing the last, none surviving. The rules weren't some sick joke. They were lifelines thrown to drowning men. That night, as I lay rigid on my mattress, I heard it. A faint scratching, like fingernails, inside the wall beside my bed. The scratching paused, listening, then resumed its frenzied pace. Tap, tap, tap. Something knocked from inside solid concrete. 3 distinct, deliberate sounds. Harris's warning blazed in my mind. If you hear scratching in the walls, run. The tapping continued in patterns that seemed almost like language. Then a voice seeped through the concrete like groundwater. Let me out, Toby. I'm trapped in here. Like G. Harris, but still breathing. My throat closed. The voice sounded human, paper thin, but articulate. Who's there? My words crawled from a desert-dry mouth. The scratching intensified. Another technician. They sealed me in when I found out. Please break through the wall. I can't breathe much longer. I stood, pressing my back against the opposite wall. The voice sounded human, desperate, but so had the oxygen mask patient before dissolving into nothing. "How do I know you're real?" I demanded. The scratching stopped, a heartbeat of silence. Then, "You don't. That's what makes this place work. You never know what's real until it's too late." Wednesday night crept in, bringing with it a text. "Elevator in main lobby. Blood spill. Please clean immediately." Then, more urgent. "Hurry." Rule 3 blazed through my thoughts. If you spot fresh blood in the elevator, call Environmental Protocol 13. Never clean it by hand. My trembling fingers punched EP13 into my phone. A robot voice answered. Acknowledged. Click. The main lobby stretched before me. Then I saw it. The elevator doors standing open, revealing a puddle of crimson. The stench hit me like a physical blow, copper and rot and something older than language. A nurse stood frozen nearby. "It just appeared," she whispered. "No one inside. It just seeped up through the floor." "Did you call EP13? I asked. She nodded. "No cleanup crew. Just us, the blood, and lights that flashed like a warning." The blood moved. It rippled like something breathing beneath a red blanket. The surface tensed and relaxed in perfect rhythm. The nurse whimpered, grabbing a mop from her cart. "Stop!" My voice shot out harsher than intended. "You can't touch it. The protocol exists for a reason." "It moved," she hissed. I watched it move. The memory of the rule burned in my brain. "Trust me," I whispered. "One drop could..." My mind refused to complete the thought. The blood formed concentric circles, rippling outward. The center bulged upward, a dome rising higher, stretching like taffy into a vaguely human shape. A head and shoulders. "Oh God," the nurse's voice shrank to nothing. "What is it doing?" It grew taller, a torso emerging from the crimson sea, wet and glistening. No features formed where a face should be, just a smooth, slick surface that somehow sensed us. The nurse snapped. "I can't just stand here." Before I could stop her, she lunged forward, mop raised like a spear. Droplets splattered her forearm. The blood hissed, a sound no liquid should make. She froze, staring at the dark spot on her skin. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished, leaving behind a bruise-like stain. She dropped the mop with a wail. It burned. The blood figure stood fully formed now, a person-shaped column of viscous red. Where a mouth should have been, a depression widened into a yawning hole. "We need to run," I backed away. "Right now." The nurse stared at her arm. The bruise spread like ink through wet paper, darkening until her entire forearm gleamed obsidian black. "It's inside me," she whispered. "I can feel it moving." The lights dimmed. The blood figure collapsed, not falling but flowing, surging toward the nurse with impossible speed. She tried to run, but the crimson tide swallowed her legs, soaking into her scrubs, her skin, herself. Her scream pierced my eardrums before cutting off as blood reached her throat. She convulsed before my eyes, skin flushing dark wine red. Blood leaked from every opening, eyes, nose, lips, like she was dissolving from within. Her gaze locked with mine, silently begging before a red film clouded over. Then stillness. Her body relaxed. She smiled, a grotesque stretching of lips too wide for her face. "Thank you for the vessel," she said in a voice ancient as buried stone. "We've been waiting so long for new skin." I stumbled backward as the thing wearing the nurse's body stepped toward me. The elevator puddle had vanished, every drop now housed inside human walls. "Don't you want to know what we are?" she asked, head tilting at an angle that cracked vertebrae. I turned and ran. Behind me, laughter, wet and bubbling. "We'll find you later, elevator man." The voice pursued me down the corridor. "We know where you sleep." A janitor mopped the corridor, whistling a tuneless melody. His bucket water shimmered faintly pink. "Was there an accident?" I asked, gesturing to the discolored water. He looked through me, eyes vacant as abandoned houses. "What accident?" "The nurse. The blood. In the elevator." He shook his head. "No accidents tonight, sir. Just routine cleaning." I stared at his bucket. The water was clear now, crystal clear, though seconds before it had shimmered carnation pink. Reality unraveling, mind fragmenting, truth dissolving. There's never been an accident, he continued, and there's never been a nurse. 3 full days have passed since my arrival. Thursday is barely 3 hours old, yet each night grows longer than the last. Rule 1 played on repeat in my skull as my phone screen glowed 3:01 a.m. 4 minutes. 4 cursed minutes before the forbidden window started. I should have been asleep, but the hospital's intercom had jolted me awake with a single phrase. Elevator maintenance needed, morgue transport. I lay rigid on my cot, watching the minutes crawl. 3:02 a.m. The rules were clear. From 3:05 a.m. to 3:15 a.m., do not operate the elevator, especially if someone requests the morgue floor. Break it, and you'll discover the morgue isn't the only place the dead gather. 3:03 a.m. My phone buzzed again. Urgent, staff stuck on morgue floor, elevator malfunction, immediate assistance required. I chewed my lip until I tasted copper. The elevator shouldn't be operating at all at this hour. That was the freaking point of the rule. Someone had already broken protocol. The morgue floor elevator should have been locked down until 3:15. 3:04 a.m. 1 minute left before the forbidden window. I could make it if I ran. My limbs moved before my brain fully decided. Boots half-laced, tool belt slung across my shoulder. I stumbled into the corridor, which seemed to elongate before my eyes, stretching impossibly as I sprinted. The main elevator bank loomed ahead. The rightmost car had its doors propped open with what looked like a metal clipboard. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of the control panel, the M button for morgue glowing a sickly yellow. My watch beeped. 3:05 a.m. precisely. A voice drifted from the car, hoarse, rasping, like someone who'd been screaming for hours. Thank God. I need to get back to the morgue. I'm supposed to be there, prepping for tomorrow's post-mortems. I inched forward, peering around the edge of the door. A figure in blue scrubs stood inside, head bowed, face obscured by surgical mask and cap. His ID badge hung at an angle I couldn't read. Sir, I'm sorry, but I can't operate this elevator until 3:15. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Hospital protocol. The man's shoulders twitched, a movement that reminded me of insect legs. Please, I'll lose my job. I've been trying to get back down there for hours. The elevator keeps bringing me up instead of down. The temperature around me dropped 10 degrees in seconds. My skin pebbled with goose flesh. Who's your supervisor? I asked, stalling, knowing already this conversation was heading nowhere good. The man raised his head slightly. Through the gap between his surgical cap and mask, I glimpsed skin the color of old wax paper, mottled with patches of greenish black. I don't have much time, he whispered, his voice shifting, deepening, multiplying, as if several throats were producing sound simultaneously. The others are waiting. I promised I'd bring someone. The clipboard propping the door began to slide, metal screeching against metal. They're so hungry down there, the man continued, head tilting at an angle that cracked something in his neck. The new arrivals aren't enough anymore. They need fresher tissue. I backed away, retreat the only option screaming through my brain. The figure lurched forward, following me into the lobby. His movements were wrong. Not stiff exactly, but disjointed, like someone trying to remember how limbs work. We've been watching you, Toby, he said, voice grating like stone on stone. The night staff, the ones who work the morgue floor. We've been waiting for you to slip up. The surgical mask slipped, revealing a mouth stitched shut with thick black thread, the kind used to close autopsy incisions. Yet somehow, impossibly, he kept speaking through those sealed lips. Just take me down. Just this once. His hand extended, fingers too long, joints too numerous. Or I can take you with me instead. I ran. Not my proudest moment, but self-preservation kicked in like a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart. Behind me I heard the elevator ding. I risked a glance back. The elevator was empty. The man in scrubs had vanished, but the doors remained open, a yawning invitation to the morgue floor, and something was emerging from the car. Not a person, but a tide of darkness. It poured over the threshold like liquid night, flowing across the lobby floor, tendrils reaching, searching. I slammed into the stairwell door, taking the steps 3 at a time back to my basement room. The darkness didn't follow, at least not visibly, but as I huddled in my room, watching the clock tick past 3:15 a.m., a new message appeared on my phone. Morgue staff reporting abnormal activity, multiple missing bodies, investigation pending. Cold sweat soaked my sheets. Whatever I'd seen wasn't a single entity but a representative, an ambassador from whatever gathered in that forbidden 10-minute window. I'd almost broken Rule 1, almost joined the ranks of whatever dwelled between the world of the living and the tagged, bagged, and catalogued dead. My phone buzzed one final time that night. Elevator reset complete. Morgue floor sealed until morning. Attendance required for day shift corpse retrieval, 7 a.m. I threw my phone across the room. After surviving 5 days in this place, my reflection shows a face I barely recognize. Dark circles like bruises beneath my eyes, skin the color of old paper. I no longer look like someone who belongs among the living. Morning brought another nightmare disguised as routine, a work order for a broken door sensor on sub-level 2. I punched the special access code with trembling fingers. When the doors parted, the air that rushed in felt wrong, stale and poisonous, carrying a chemical stink that burned the back of my throat. The corridor squeezed inward, metal walls that seemed to pulse with each flicker of the dying lights. Abandoned wheelchairs with missing parts huddled against the walls like wounded animals. Containment ward. Authorized staff only, proclaimed a sign. The door sensor dangled at the corridor's end. I knelt before it, my only prayer that I could finish fast enough to escape this place before it swallowed me whole. "Are you fixing that?" The voice slid into my ears like ice water. I turned and found myself face to face with a child, a boy wrapped in layers of gauze that left only his eyes visible. The bandages were singed black at the edges, wisps of smoke curling upward. Heat radiated from him in visible waves. Through gaps in the wrappings, his flesh glistened, blackened yet somehow wet, like charcoal covered in oil. The boy's eyes bored into mine, ancient eyes in a child's face, glowing ember orange with an internal flame that defied explanation. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" My voice emerged as a stranger's. He shook his head, the bandages rasping against each other like sandpaper. "They keep me down here," he whispered. "They say it's for my own good, that my burns could hurt people." My gaze fixed on the charred skin visible beneath his wrappings, not scabbed or healing, but shimmering with an unearthly iridescence. The floor beneath his bare feet glowed faintly, the concrete actually softening under his touch. "It wasn't always like this," he continued, shuffling closer. The air between us rippled like a mirage. "I was normal once, before the accident, before the fire got inside me." He raised one bandaged hand toward my face. "Please, let me see the sun again." His plea gutted me. For a moment I saw my own childhood reflected in those burning eyes, the desperation for freedom, for normalcy. But as I opened my mouth to respond, metal footsteps echoed through the corridor. The boy's eyes widened, flames leaping higher within their depths. "I'm hungry all the time now," he whispered urgently. "Do you know what it's like to be hungry and never get filled? No matter how much they feed me? What do you eat?" The question escaped before my survival instinct could silence it. His eyes flashed brighter. Heat, light, energy. His voice dropped to a hiss of steam. Life. Smoke leaked from between his bandages, curling around his face like living tendrils. The temperature spiked dramatically. "I could show you," he offered. "I could show you what's under these bandages. Would you like to see?" The footsteps grew louder. The boy's head snapped toward the sound. "Go," he hissed, backing into the nearest room. I glimpsed raw patches of flesh between his bandages, weeping a clear fluid that sizzled and evaporated the instant it hit the floor. An orderly rounded the corner. "Finish and get out, technician." I reconnected the sensor with fingers that felt disconnected from my body. As I worked, I noticed a small placard beside the boy's door. Patient number 644. Not a name, not a diagnosis, just a number, as if humanity itself had been burned away. While I gathered my tools, a whisper leaked through the door. "I'll find a way out eventually. When I do, I'll look for you first. I like you, Toby. I'd burn you slow. The elevator ride upward was eternal. My mind splintered into fragments. One piece stuck on the boy's plea for sunlight, another circling the morality of keeping such a creature locked away, yet another wondering what burning slow might feel like. That night I jerked awake, my consciousness ripped from sleep by an unbearable heat. At the foot of my bed stood a small figure wrapped in singed bandages, the air around him rippling like desert heat. Concrete bubbled beneath his feet. "I told you I'd find a way," the burned boy whispered. "They can't keep me contained forever." I blinked, and he vanished. The temperature plummeted, leaving me shivering in sweat-drenched bedding. But morning's weak light revealed the truth. 5 perfectly formed scorch marks on the concrete floor, each the exact size of a child's toes. Proof that something impossible had stood watching me while I slept. Saturdays in normal places mean freedom. Here, they mean fewer witnesses to the hospital's horrors. I'd convinced myself I'd seen the worst Spring Hill Hospital had to offer. I was so naive. The work order came at twilight. Elevator maintenance required, S4 water damage assessment. Electrical concerns, possible shaft flooding, sublevel 4, a floor that didn't exist on any blueprint I'd seen. My blood ran glacial as I stared at my phone. New depths meant new horrors, but refusing wasn't an option, not with Dr. Brown's warning still echoing in my skull. Besides, flooding in an elevator shaft was a legitimate safety risk, one I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to. I packed extra equipment, waterproof voltage testers, rubber boots, sealant tape for exposed wiring, standard protocol for water damage. Nothing standard about where I was heading. The service elevator descended past floors I recognized. When it reached S3, it kept going, mechanical whine shifting to a deeper groan. The indicator lights died, then rekindled with a single illuminated button. S4. The doors parted onto absolute darkness. The ambient temperature plummeted, my exhaled breath clouding before my face. The floor beneath my feet wasn't concrete or tile, it splashed. An inch of standing water stretched into blackness beyond my flashlight's beam. The corridor walls were different here, older stonework, not hospital construction. Like the building had been grafted onto something that predated it by centuries. The smell hit me, not hospital antiseptic, but something organic, primordial. Rot, salt, and something alive. My boots sloshed through water that felt too thick, too resistant, as if it didn't want me to proceed. The ripples spreading from each step glowed faintly blue-green, bioluminescent, living water. The elevator itself seemed relatively undamaged despite the surrounding flood. I checked the electrical systems first, finding waterproofing intact but showing signs of strain. The water level had reached circuit boxes at the base of the shaft, requiring immediate attention if the elevator was to remain operational. I began applying water-resistant sealant to the more vulnerable components, the mundane task a thin tether to normalcy in this submerged nightmare. As I worked, I noticed a doorway looming ahead, its frame ancient oak swollen with moisture, hinges green with verdigris. No sign indicated its purpose. The water appeared to be seeping from beneath it, meaning I'd need to investigate the source if I was to properly assess the damage. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open, the wood giving way with unexpected ease. Beyond lay a vast chamber, a vaulted ceiling vanishing into shadow above, walls lost in darkness to either side. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the boundaries, but I could see what filled most of the space. Water. A subterranean lake, its surface glassy and still, reflecting my light like a black mirror. Chains descended from the darkness above, disappearing beneath the water's surface. Not modern chains, but ancient iron links thick as my arm, crusted with rust and organic growth. They swayed slightly, though no breeze stirred this deep. "Hello?" My voice shattered the silence, echoing across the water's surface. The lake began to sing. Not metaphorically, actually sing. A chorus of voices rose from beneath the surface, wordless harmonies that resonated in my chest cavity. The melody defied musical logic, notes that shouldn't exist alongside each other, harmonies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. The water rippled, concentric circles spreading from multiple points, as if disturbed from below. Then heads began to break the surface. Dozens of them, pale ovals reflecting my light. Not bodies, just heads. Faces tilted upward, eyes sealed shut, mouths open in song. I stumbled back, heel catching on uneven stone. My flashlight beam swept across the chamber as I caught myself, illuminating what hung from the ceiling. Dozens of gurneys suspended by those massive chains dangling above the water. Hospital gurneys, some modern, some ancient stretchers of wood and canvas, all empty. The singing shifted, becoming words I somehow understood, though they weren't in any language I recognized. Join us. Beneath, where the weight lifts, where breathing is remembering, where skin dissolves into something greater. The heads began to rise further, revealing not necks, but elongated pale structures, spines without flesh, vertebrae connected by translucent tissue. They rose higher, water sloughing off what should have been shoulders, but instead were masses of whitish tendrils that pulsed rhythmically. My back pressed against the doorframe, retreat blocked by my own frozen muscles. One face turned toward me, features human but wrong, lips too wide, nose barely an afterthought, eyes still closed but visibly moving beneath lids like thin paper. "Elevator man," it sang, voice like water rushing through rusted pipes. "We've been waiting. The lowest level has been so lonely since they sealed us in." I found my voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. "What are you?" A ripple of something like laughter passed through the chorus. Patients. Failures. The ones whose treatments did not proceed as expected. More of them broke the surface, forming a loose semicircle facing me. One raised a limb, not an arm, but a pale appendage that branched into too many finger-like projections. "They tried to cure us," the first face continued. "Experimental hydrotherapies. When we changed, they chained us here, fed us, studied us, then abandoned us when we became inconvenient." The singing grew louder, the water's surface vibrating with their voices. My bones resonated painfully, teeth chattering with harmonics that shouldn't exist. "The water remembers, elevator man. The water preserves. We've been here since before the hospital. We'll be here after it's gone." I felt something cold against my ankle. Not water, but something solid and slick. I looked down to see pale tendrils curling around my boot, having crossed the distance from the lake's edge without disturbing the surface. "Join us," the chorus sang in perfect unison. Beneath the weight of air, beneath the burden of form, beneath the tyranny of time, the tendril tightened, yanking me off balance. I crashed to my knees in the shallow water, the shock of cold breaking my paralysis. I slashed at the pale appendage with my utility knife, the blade passing through it like rotten vegetation. Black fluid spurted from the wound, hissing where it splashed against my skin. The chorus screamed, a sound like metal grinding against bone, their perfect harmony shattered. I scrambled backward through the doorway as more tendrils whipped across the surface, searching for me. "You're already carrying part of us," the first face called after me, voice rippling with unnatural resonance. "The water gets in, through skin, through lungs, through eyes. It carries us with it." I slammed the ancient door, throwing my weight against it as impacts shuddered from the other side. The wood held, but water began seeping beneath, glowing with that same bioluminescence. A final whisper penetrated the barrier. "We'll grow inside you, elevator man. Every time you drink, every time you bathe. We're patient. We've had decades to learn patience." I fled back to the elevator, my soaked clothes clinging to me like a second skin. In the car's mirrored walls, I watched in horror as faint blue-green light pulsed beneath my skin, tracing the paths of veins and arteries, mapping the contours of muscle and bone. Despite my terror, I forced myself to complete the most urgent repairs, sealing critical electrical components, applying waterproofing to vulnerable connections, filing an emergency report about severe water damage requiring specialized containment. The automated system chirped acknowledgement, but I included a second report through official channels once I reached the surface level, detailing extensive flooding affecting the elevator shaft and surrounding areas. I deliberately left out the singing, the faces, the impossible anatomy, focusing only on the technical danger posed by the water. Sunday bleeds into Monday as midnight strikes, marking 7 days of my residence in this nightmare. I can feel myself changing, not just mentally but physically. Midnight found me wedged into Elevator C's narrow shaft, twisting wires with numb fingers. The hospital had fallen into that dead zone silence where even breathing feels like an intrusion. Then the ringing sliced through the quiet, a shrill, insistent sound that vibrated in my teeth. The red emergency phone. The red emergency phone. My screwdriver slipped. Rule 4 blazed through my brain. When the red emergency phone in the elevator rings, do not answer it. Graham Harris's impaled corpse flashed before my eyes. The hospital intercom clicked on. Pick up, Toby. You can't hide. My name. It knew my damn name. I jammed the maintenance panel shut with trembling hands. The phone's ring morphed into something accusatory. A judge sentencing me to death. I know you can hear me, Toby. The voice oozed through the intercom. Don't you want to know why the rules exist? Don't you want to know what's really happening here? Your predecessor answered. The voice dropped to a stage whisper. He's still here, you know. Parts of him. Would you like to speak with him? The ringing cut off mid-shrill, plunging me into silence. Then, a wet, gurgling noise slithered from the speaker. Toby, the new voice bubbled, barely human. Don't make my mistake. Bile surged up my throat. Was that really Graham? Some piece of him preserved by whatever unnatural force ran through Spring Hill Hospital's veins. You see? The first voice returned. He's trying to warn you. But I could help you, Toby. I could show you how to leave this place. All you have to do is pick up the phone. After what felt like years, silence fell again. I exhaled a breath I'd been holding so long my chest ached. Not tonight, I whispered. Not ever. The elevator lurched downward, lights flickering irritably. The intercom hissed one final time. Very good, Toby. You're learning. But there are other ways to reach you. Your dreams, for instance. Your reflection. The walls of your room. I'll find a way in. I always do. When the doors parted, I staggered out. My phone buzzed. Diagnostics complete. No anomalies. A laugh escaped me. Sharp, bitter. No anomalies. Right. Just supernatural telemarketers from hell calling me by name. That night, I dreamed of phones ringing in abandoned corridors, of cables writhing with predatory purpose, of Graham Harris's corpse whispering my name with tenderness. In the nightmare's climax, I answered a ringing receiver, and my own voice greeted me from the other end, calmly describing exactly where my body would be found. Tuesday begins with a shocking discovery. There's something on your back. The eyeless patient's words haunted me. Not just the claim, but the certainty. The way those hollow sockets had fixed on a point just beyond my shoulder during our encounter 3 days ago. I'd first seen the patient a few days ago while replacing worn guide shoes on the West Wing elevator. Their hospital gown had hung loose around an emaciated frame, head bandaged where eyes should have been. The encounter had been brief, a passing comment about something feeding on me, but it had planted a seed of paranoia that grew with each passing hour. Shortly after the encounter, while replacing a faulty door sensor in the pediatric wing, I noticed the first mark, a small, purplish lesion between my shoulder blades, discovered while washing up in the maintenance closet sink. By evening, as I finished my inspection rounds, it had grown to the size of a quarter. By midnight, I could feel it pulse in time with my heartbeat. The hospital basement held a small medical storage room, mostly outdated supplies and expired medications. I broke the lock with my multi-tool, desperation overriding caution. Inside, dusty shelves offered little help until I found an antique hand mirror with an extendable handle. In the privacy of my room, I positioned myself between the cracked bathroom mirror and the antique one, creating an angle that finally revealed my back. The sight froze my blood. A growth clung to my spine. Not quite plant, not quite animal. Tendrils had embedded themselves into my skin along my vertebrae, spreading outward like dark roots. At its center bulged a sac-like structure the size of a fist, purplish-black and glistening with a thin membrane that pulsed rhythmically. I bit down on a washcloth to muffle my scream. Shock gave way to frantic planning. I couldn't reach it properly to remove it myself. Hospital staff were out of the question. Dr. Brown had made it clear whose side they were on. I needed help, but who would believe me? My answer came at 2 a.m., an orderly I'd seen occasionally but never spoken to, wheeling an empty gurney down the corridor outside my room. I intercepted him, desperation making me direct. "I need help," I said, voice low and urgent. "Medical help. Something's attached itself to me." The orderly, his name tag read Chen, regarded me with wary eyes. "Show me," he said after a moment's consideration. In my room, I turned my back and lifted my shirt. Chen's sharp intake of breath confirmed the horror's reality. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, fingers hovering inches from my skin. "How long?" 3 days, maybe, since I encountered a patient with no eyes. Recognition flickered across his face. The eyeless ones, they're facilitators. They don't infect you themselves, but they can see the parasites, mark you for infestation. "What the hell is it?" I asked, terror squeezing my throat. Chen's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The hospital calls them symbiotic stabilizers. Staff whispers call them passengers. They're how Spring Hill Hospital maintains control." He moved to his gurney, pulling surgical implements from a hidden compartment beneath. "I can remove it, but we need to hurry. Once they're fully bonded, separation is usually fatal." I lay face down on my cot, biting into my pillow as Chen worked. The pain transcended anything I'd ever experienced. Not just physical agony, but something deeper, as if the creature had tapped into my central nervous system. "It's fighting me," Chen muttered, scalpel slicing through connecting tissue. "They always do. The hospital uses them to influence behavior, ensure compliance." Blood soaked into my mattress as he worked, the coppery scent filling my nostrils. Something wet and heavy plopped into a metal basin beside my bed. "Got it. Or most of it." Chen's voice held the strain of concentrated effort. "The tendrils extend deep. Some will remain, but without the central organism, they should wither." I twisted to look at what he'd removed. In the basin squirmed a thing like a bloated leech crossed with a spider. Central mass pulsing angrily, thin appendages thrashing at air. "What do they do?" I asked, nausea rising as I watched it writhe. Chen's face darkened. "They tap into your brain, spinal cord. Make suggestions that feel like your own thoughts." He began dressing the wound, applying antiseptic that burned like acid. "Follow the rules. Don't ask questions. Accept the unacceptable." That's how Spring Hill Hospital maintains order. Not just through fear, but through direct biological control. The creature in the basin was already deteriorating, its mass collapsing in on itself without a host. "How do you know all this?" I asked. Chen rolled up his sleeve, revealing a scar running the length of his forearm, puckered and discolored. "I had one too. Maintenance workers, orderlies, janitorial staff, we're all infected eventually. Most never realize it. They just adapt, accept." His eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen beyond veils meant to remain intact. "I removed mine 6 months ago. Been helping others when I can. But they're watching me. Time's running out." He packed up his tools with practiced efficiency. "Change the dressing daily. If you feel it growing back, because sometimes they do, find me. Ward C, midnight to 8 a.m. As he turned to leave, I caught his arm. "Why help me? Why risk it?" Chen's face hardened with quiet resolve. "Because whatever Spring Hill Hospital is becoming, whatever it's turning into, it started with people like us, the invisible ones, those nobody would miss, and it will only end if enough of us break free." He left me with a bottle of unlabeled pills, antibiotics mixed with something he wouldn't name. That night, fever dreams took me. Visions of vast networks threading through the hospital walls, floors, ceilings. Human bodies suspended within the structure like flies in a spider's web, tendrils connecting them to the greater organism. Spring Hill Hospital wasn't just a hospital gone wrong. It was transforming into something with purpose, intelligence, hunger. Despite my condition, I forced myself to continue my rounds the next day. Each elevator inspection became an act of defiance, each repair a silent rebellion. I found myself sabotaging the systems in subtle ways, loosening connections just enough to require future maintenance, creating problems that would demand my continued presence while looking like normal wear and tear. It wasn't a conscious strategy at first, just an instinct to create reasons for my continued employment that would give me time to understand and eventually escape this place. By morning, my back throbbed with dull pain, but clarity had returned to my thoughts. Subtle suggestions that had felt like my own, justifications for staying, rationalizations for the horrors I'd witnessed, now stood revealed as foreign implants. The rules still protected me from the hospital's more immediate dangers, but I'd been carrying the most insidious threat against my spine all along. 2 days later, Chen disappeared. His locker was cleaned out, his name erased from the staff roster as if he'd never existed. The only evidence I hadn't imagined him was the surgical tools he'd left behind and the slowly healing wound on my back. That, and the growing certainty that I wasn't just maintaining elevators. I was becoming part of a vast, living system that used human components like cells in a body awakening to its own terrible potential. 11 days have passed, and the calendar mocks me with its innocent Thursday. The morgue floor had been calling me since my 3 a.m. encounter. Not literally calling, though in Spring Hill Hospital that wouldn't have surprised me, but pulling at my attention like a splinter working its way deeper. I needed answers about what gathered during that forbidden window, what waited when the rules were broken. Daylight provided the illusion of safety needed to investigate. The morgue level during regular hours operated like any hospital department. Fluorescent lights, clipboard-carrying attendants, the chemical smell of preservation masking death's underlying stench. I found a legitimate reason to visit. An elevator inspection overdue by months according to maintenance logs. The attendant who greeted me had the washed-out look of someone who spent too many years underground. His name tag read Collins, skin the color of library paste stretched over prominent cheekbones. Inspection's been postponed, he said, not meeting my eyes. Admin orders. I stood my ground. My work order says otherwise. A silent standoff followed, broken when Collins's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, just stay where I can see you, and don't touch anything that looks unusual. The elevator itself was unremarkable, older than those on upper floors, its inspection panel thick with dust. I made a show of checking connections, testing door sensors, all while observing the morgue's layout from my peripheral vision. Standard autopsy tables occupied the central area. Refrigerated drawers lined the walls, each labeled with names and dates. But a secondary door caught my attention. Heavy steel with a combination lock, unmarked except for a symbol that matched one from the rule sheet. A circle inside a triangle inside a square. "What's in there?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Collins's head snapped up, eyes suddenly alert. "Storage, nothing important. Looks pretty secure for being, nothing important." The attendant approached, voice dropping to a whisper though we were alone. "Listen, I know who you are. The new elevator technician. They always put you in the same room. Always give you the same rules." Ice water trickled down my spine. "What do you mean always?" Collins glanced at the security camera in the corner, then subtly angled his body to block its view. "This hospital, it's older than records show. The building you see was constructed in 1954, but it replaced something that stood here since colonial times." "A previous hospital?" "Not exactly." His hands fidgeted with a pen, clicking it nervously. The original structure was built by a group called the Philomorphic Society, supposedly a medical research organization, but really something else. They believed certain conditions allowed for communion between living and dead tissue. That death was a permeable boundary under specific circumstances. My mind flashed to the entities that gathered during the 305 to 3015 window. What happened to them? Officially? Disbanded after a typhoid outbreak in 1928. Unofficially, he nodded toward the locked door. Their work continued. Underground. First figuratively, then literally. Collins's eyes darkened with knowledge that weighed on him like physical mass. When they built Spring Hill Hospital, they didn't just replace the old building. They built around it, over it, through it. Parts of the original structure still exist within these walls. chambers and passageways that don't appear on any blueprint. Like sub-level 4, I whispered. His face went slack with surprise. You've seen it? The immersion chamber? I nodded, the memory of that subterranean lake and its chorus of transformed patients still fresh in my mind. Then you understand. This place isn't just a hospital, it's becoming something else. The Philomorphic Society's ultimate goal. A living structure that bridges the gap between life and death. The rules aren't just superstition, they're containment protocols. Boundaries to keep whatever's growing here from spreading too quickly. My throat had gone desert dry. What's behind that door? Collins's expression shifted, fear giving way to grim resignation. The ones who come during the forbidden window? They don't just visit and leave. Some of them stay. Specimens, study materials, ancient products of society's early experiments. Jesus. No, Collins said, voice hollow. No divine presence here, just human arrogance stretching beyond its bounds. He pulled something from his pocket, a yellowed, folded paper. I shouldn't give you this, but you've survived longer than most. Maybe you'll be the one to... The door to the main corridor swung open. Dr. Brown stood framed in the entrance, her face a mask of professional concern that didn't touch her eyes. Mr. Johnson, what a surprise finding you here. Her gaze shifted to Collins, who had gone rigid. And Collins, sharing stories again? We discussed this. The paper disappeared back into Collins's pocket. He straightened, face emptying of expression. Just explaining our cataloging system. For maintenance purposes. Brown's smile stretched too wide. How thoughtful. But Mr. Johnson needs to return upstairs. There's an issue with the North Wing elevator that requires immediate attention. No such issue existed. I'd checked all systems that morning. But arguing meant revealing I knew she was lying. I gathered my tools, nodding to Collins, whose eyes now held the 1,000-yard stare of a man who knows his fate is sealed. As I passed Brown in the doorway, she leaned close. Curiosity has consequences here, Toby. Collins knows that better than most. 2 days later, I passed the morgue floor on a legitimate call. A different attendant greeted me, younger, eyes clear of the haunted knowledge that had shadowed Collins's. When I asked about him, the new attendant looked confused. Collins? No one by that name works here. I've been the day shift attendant for 3 years. That night, an unmarked envelope slid beneath my door. Inside, I found the yellowed paper Collins had tried to give me. A partial floor plan showing areas of the hospital that didn't exist on official blueprints. Sublevels I hadn't known about. Passages connecting seemingly separate wings. And in the margin, a hastily scrawled note. The only way out is through the oldest part, below S4, where it began. I never saw Collins again, but sometimes working late I swear I hear his voice, not from the corridors or rooms but from inside the walls themselves. Just another component absorbed into Spring Hill Hospital's evolving system. Sleep fractures now. Every night around 3 a.m. the breathing starts. Not mine, but someone else's. Ragged inhales, wet exhales that tickle my ear canal with horrifying proximity. My hand slaps the lamp switch, flooding my cell with sickly light that reveals nothing. Yet the watching continues. Unseen eyes boring into me from angles that shouldn't exist. The walls contract during these episodes. Concrete surfaces inching closer with each passing night, like a mouth slowly closing around prey. Last night, the breathing pressed so close its moisture dampened my earlobe. Something inside me snapped. "Leave me alone," I screamed, fist connecting with concrete, skin splitting across knuckles. The breathing stopped. Silence dropped like a guillotine blade. Then a voice, high-pitched yet ancient, childlike yet wrong. "But you're the one who came to us, Toby. You moved into our home. Who's there?" My fingers scrabbled against the wall. "We've always been here," it whispered. "We're the ones who never leave. The ones who can't leave." Light flooded the room, exposing empty corners that somehow felt fuller than before. The walls looked wrong, as though the concrete had quietly rearranged itself while darkness reigned. "Show yourself," I demanded. Giggles rippled through the air, the sound of children playing with something broken. "We are. You just don't know how to see yet. But you will. They all do, eventually." Sleep becomes my enemy, consciousness my only defense. I wander Spring Hill Hospital's midnight corridors with bloodshot eyes, searching for explanations that might save my fracturing sanity. Logic remains my addiction. If I can just find the mechanical cause, the rational core behind these impossibilities. A forgotten hallway yields a door marked Archives in peeling paint, secured with a padlock that surrenders to my father's multi-tool with embarrassing ease. An old photograph falls between brittle pages, Spring Hill Hospital's exterior circa 1954. Same imposing facade, same Gothic pretensions. But where today's building stretches 6 floors toward indifferent skies, this older incarnation reaches higher, 8 floors jutting against cloud-heavy horizons. 2 entire floors, gone, vanished, erased not just from records but from physical existence. A maintenance report from 1976 lurks between personnel files. Emergency sealing procedures for sub-basement containment. References to unexplained structural changes and spatial anomalies pepper the text. A handwritten note bleeds across the bottom margin. 3 more staff missing this week. Recommend termination of elevator access to all sub-level areas. The irony tastes bitter. Here I am, running those same elevators, maintaining passages to places that should remain sealed. I'd hoped for something definitive, smoking gun evidence of intentional malevolence. Instead, I found fragments suggesting something worse. Perhaps no one's in control. No mastermind orchestrating these horrors. Just a building that developed its own appetite, its own rules, its own reality. The breathing follows me now, even in daylight. Patient, persistent, a constant companion reminding me that in Spring Hill Hospital, I'm never truly alone, never truly safe, and perhaps never truly meant to leave. My fractured mind already knows what my body refuses to accept. I'm not maintaining this place. It's digesting me, slowly, methodically, one horror at a time. Sunday morning breaks with deceptive tranquility, the skeleton weekend staff leaving corridors emptier than usual. After 5 elevator maintenance calls before noon, most of them fabricated problems from my own quiet sabotage, I'd retreated to my room, searching Collins's floor plans for possible escape routes. The past few days I'd been locked in a silent war with hospital administration, though they might not have recognized it as such until now. It began after discovering the parasite on my back. Without the creature's influence clouding my judgment, I saw the hospital's requests with newfound clarity. 3 times this week, late-night messages had ordered me to unlock specific elevator access points, the morgue level during the forbidden window, the isolation ward button override, and most recently, unrestricted passage to sub-level 3. Each time I'd acknowledge the request, then deliberately sabotage the mechanisms, crossing wires, removing key circuit components, jamming door tracks with barely visible obstructions that would register as mechanical failures rather than deliberate interference. Rule 7 had been my guiding principle. The isolation ward button is locked for a reason. If it lights up on its own, do not press it. Whatever's isolated down there doesn't want to stay alone. I reasoned that if I shouldn't press it when it lit up on its own, I certainly shouldn't enable others to access it either. The same logic applied to the other restricted areas. Each night after receiving these requests, I'd lie awake listening to distant thuds and scrapes, like massive objects being dragged across concrete far below where I slept. 3 thunderous knocks jolted me from my half-conscious stupor. Dr. Brown's silhouette filled the doorway, her lab coat gleaming unnaturally white against the corridor's gloom. The moment our eyes locked, something primal within me recoiled. Her gaze held a predatory gleam. "We need to talk." She pushed past me, the scent of antiseptic and something metallic, blood, invading my sanctuary. "Why have you been ignoring certain directives, Toby? Some floors remain locked when we instruct otherwise." "The rules," I stammered. "Rules," she spat, the word twisting her features into something almost inhuman. For a heartbeat, her face seemed to shift, bone and muscle rearranging beneath skin stretched too tight. "If you actually knew what lurked in these halls, you'd realize we can't keep everything locked away forever. We have a hospital to run. And what about the bodies? The horrors? The patients crying out for help?" My voice cracked. Her eyes narrowed, a sheen crossing them like the silvery film that forms over dead fish. You think we can save them all? You think this place can function if we indulge every moral pang? We do what's necessary to keep going, Toby. My gaze flickered to the cracked mirror above my sink, and reality fractured with it. Her reflection moved independently, jaw unhinging like a snake's, stretching wider than human anatomy should allow. They're not patients anymore, her reflection mouthed, its lips moving out of sync with the real Dr. Brown. They're food. We require the isolation ward to be accessible. You interfered. You cost us time and resources. Time for what? Why is that ward so important? Her laugh pierced my ears. You truly want to know? Fine. Let's just say some things don't stay dead if you lock them up long enough. Fear crystallized in my spine. The voice from the elevator speaker echoed through my memory. Come see me. A hungry darkness waiting beneath layers of concrete and denial. I'm not unleashing anything. I've seen enough to know its madness. Dr. Brown's lips peeled back, revealing teeth too numerous, too sharp. Her skin rippled as if something crawled beneath its surface. Her voice plummeted octaves. Your job isn't to question. If you keep resisting, you'll end up like the last technician. In the mirror, horror unfolded in high definition. Her reflection's jaw extended, skin splitting along seams that shouldn't exist, revealing something pale and writhing beneath. Its eyes swelled like infected wounds before bursting, dark fluid cascading down a face that resembled melting wax. It's hungry, Toby, she whispered, voice suddenly tender. The hospital is always hungry, and we either feed it or it feeds on us. Graham Harris, I managed. I found him. She tilted her head with an owlish precision that no human neck should manage. Graham made choices. Poor choices. The hospital made an example of him. In the mirror, her reflection's chest tore open along a vertical seam, revealing a writhing mass of appendages, silvery, glistening things that resembled cables yet moved with organic purpose. Last warning, Toby. Unlock the wards when ordered, or face the consequences. She strode out. I collapsed onto my bed, lungs seizing. The room spun around me. That thing was no doctor, no human. Something else wore Dr. Brown's skin like an ill-fitting suit. As the door swung closed, her reflection remained in the mirror for one impossible moment longer than physics should allow. It turned to face me directly, mouth forming 4 distinct words. The hospital always wins. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of dread, checking and double-checking my equipment. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere before a devastating storm. Hospital staff moved with unusual urgency, their faces tight with an anxiety that transcended normal workplace stress. When I passed the nurses' station on the 4th floor, I overheard fragments of hushed conversation, containment protocols, unprecedented activity in the lower levels, preparation procedures. By evening, a suffocating silence had descended on the upper floors. The usual sounds of a working hospital, beeping monitors, squeaking wheels, murmured conversations, had dwindled to nothing. In their place, a distant vibration thrummed through the walls, growing stronger by the hour. It felt like something massive stirring after years of dormancy. My phone buzzed with increasingly urgent maintenance requests, all for the sub-level elevators. I addressed them perfunctorily, making sure they remained functional but secure, responding to legitimate mechanical issues while maintaining the blocks I'd implemented on restricted areas. With each trip to the lower levels, I noticed more staff wearing surgical masks, moving with the jerky, disjointed motions I'd come to associate with the hospital's influence. Something was building beneath us. Pressure in a sealed system looking for the weakest point to rupture. As midnight approached, I made one final check of the main elevator bank, where I found something unusual. A maintenance keycard taped to the underside of the control panel with my name scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. Next to it, a note. Control room access. When it starts, you'll need this. Chen, the orderly who'd removed my parasite, the one who'd disappeared. He'd left me a lifeline. I pocketed the card, heart hammering against my ribs. The sub-level indicators on the elevator panel flashed in irregular patterns. Not random, but like a code or language I couldn't quite comprehend. A warning, perhaps, or a countdown. Back in my room, I laid out everything I might need for what felt inevitable. Tools that could double as weapons. A crude map based on Collins's floor plan. My father's multi-tool that had become an extension of my own hand. Sleep refused to come. The walls seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting with deliberate purpose. Something whispered just below the threshold of hearing. A voice made of many voices, growing louder with each passing hour. The hospital was preparing for something, and so was I. The breaking point arrives with the witching hour, 2 a.m. on a Monday, marking the start of my third week in this nightmare. Perhaps it was inevitable that the hospital would force my hand tonight. The pressure had been building, a thunderhead gathering force, dark and electric. By 2 a.m., the dam finally broke. Alarms shrieked through every corridor, red emergency lights pulsing like exposed arteries. My phone vibrated. Emergency in sublevel 3, multiple patients. Unlock all elevators now. I grabbed my toolkit and the key card Chen had left me. In my first days here, I'd seen the elevator control room, a centralized nerve center that managed all vertical transport within the hospital. Chen must have known I'd need access beyond that of a normal technician. As the building trembled around me, I understood why. The hospital's security system operated on a principle of compartmentalization. Each elevator and stairwell had independent locks and overrides, but the master controls lived in a fortified room on the mezzanine level between the ground floor and basement. Before Chen disappeared, he'd explained the hospital's emergency protocols during one of our brief conversations. In case of fire or other crisis, someone has to manage the vertical access points. Usually it's security, but the backup operators are maintenance personnel, especially the elevator technician. The card worked. The heavy door hissed open, revealing banks of monitors and control panels. The room should have been staffed, but whoever normally occupied the swivel chair had abandoned their post, perhaps fled, perhaps joined whatever chaos was erupting below. I ran to the control room. The monitors screamed with alerts. Containment compromised. Mass outbreak. Their warnings painting nightmarish possibilities across my mind's eye. Were they rising, escaping, hunting? Text messages flooded in, demanding, "Override the locks." But something deeper than reason whispered, "Don't do it. Don't let them up." The building itself seemed to heave around me, corridors trembling with crashes and inhuman shrieks. The ventilation system exhaled the unmistakable copper penny reek of fresh blood, as if the entire structure had been gutted. My hand hovered over the control panel. Unlock everything, and maybe staff could evacuate the innocent, contain whatever had broken loose. But that same action might unleash abominations into areas filled with sleeping patients, normal people with normal ailments who had no idea what lurked beneath them. The security feeds flickered with hellish snapshots, hallways churning with shadows that moved against the light, walls that expanded and contracted like breathing lungs, patients whose bodies flowed like melting wax. One screen showed Dr. Brown surrounded by orderlies, her back to the camera. When she turned, my stomach liquefied. Her face had stretched, features rearranged like clay molded by invisible hands, eyes too wide and unblinking, mouth a gaping, toothless cavern consuming half her face. "Let them rise," she commanded, staring directly into the camera lens. "Let them feed." My decision crystallized in that moment of pure terror. I slammed my palm onto the global lockdown button. Something warm and wet splattered my hand, blood dripping from the ceiling vent, landing in perfect crimson circles on the console's metal surface. The walls shuddered with renewed fury, something massive throwing itself against barriers far below. "You've made your choice." Dr. Brown's voice slithered through the intercom speakers, her words layered with dozens of others speaking in unison. "Now you'll see what happens to those who deny the hospital its needs." The control room door exploded inward. Standing in the frame, silhouetted against emergency lights, was the nurse from the blood incident. She'd changed. Her skin had the grayish hue of week-old corpses, blue-black veins mapping her body like cracked glass. Eyes like pools of crude oil gleamed wetly in the dim light. "The hospital remembers," she gurgled, "and it never forgives." She lurched toward me, not walking but jerking, movements staccato and wrong. each footstep left spreading black stains on the tile. You could have fed us strangers. She bubbled through a vertical tear opening from chin to hairline, something dark and glistening writhing inside the cavity where human organs should be. Now you'll feed us yourself. As she lunged, arms outstretched, fingers elongated into talons, I punched the emergency lockdown override. Steel shutters dropped like guillotine blades, sealing every entrance, every vent. One crashed down precisely as the nurse reached for my throat, severing her arm at the elbow with the clean precision of a butcher's cleaver. The amputated limb flopped on the floor, fingers still grasping at nothing, black sludge pulsing from its wound. Beyond the barrier, her howls vibrated through inches of steel. Then silence fell. The alarms died mid-wail. A final message scrolled across the main screen. Containment reestablished. The building settled around me like an old dog returning to sleep after a momentary disturbance. The severed arm on the floor had stopped its desperate grasping. As I watched, it began to dissolve, flesh liquefying into the same black fluid that had served as its blood. The puddle seeped between floor tiles, disappearing as if the building itself had swallowed it. I dragged myself back to my room, collapsed onto my cot, and stared at the ceiling. Dad's medical debts still waited like patient predators. The promise of enough money to finally escape dangled before me, but the truth had solidified in my mind. Spring Hill Hospital doesn't release its grip on what it claims as its own. Its presence clung to me like a second skin, a parasite I couldn't scrape off. Yet I still clutched that fragile dream. My little coffee shop with sunlit windows, the smell of fresh bread and coffee replacing the stench of antiseptic and rot. A place where the worst crisis might be a burned pastry or spilled drink. If I just lasted long enough for that final paycheck, maybe, just maybe, I could outrun whatever had marked me. As sleep dragged me under, the walls around me expanded and contracted with slow, deliberate rhythm. The building exhaled a promise that whispered directly into my brain. It wasn't finished with me yet. Not by a long shot. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.